ThatMinorityThing.com, John Ridley, and GOP strategist Ed Rollins. David, you heard in Ed Henry's report that President Obama is going to be getting a daily economic briefing similar to the daily intelligence briefing that presidents always get. You've worked in 4 White Houses. Is this unprecedented? I mean, do presidents normally get a daily economic briefing?
Never happened before, to my knowledge, and I think it's a very good move. Whether he'll also get from Larry Summers, who's going to be conducting these briefings, a written a summary of the events as he gets from the CIA is unclear. But that daily briefing will focus him on economic issues at a time when many around him think, Anderson, that amidst all this joy, that the clouds are darkening very rapidly on the economy. They're worried that the unemployment numbers, the number of jobless is actually going to increase over what it was the last 3 months, 500,000 a month loss over the last 3 months. They worry it's going to go up higher than that. They had a bad report from the Congressional Budget Office yesterday that said their stimulus plan for spending on infrastructure, actually less than half of that money will be spent in the next couple of years or so, that most of it will go out pretty late.
Right, that a lot of these projects aren't shovel-ready and may not be shovel-ready until 2010.
Right, and that's one of the things Republicans are going to press in that meeting tomorrow with him and early next week. They think we ought to go for more tax cuts and fewer of these infrastructure projects. The Democrats don't think that's a wise way to go. So and beyond that, we're in this grip of an international set of questions about banks. Both in the United Kingdom and the United States are growing questions whether the banks are weakening so rapidly that they might have to be nationalized. That would come at enormous cost and would be an enormous intervention by the U.S. government. So there is an awful lot that's piling up for him right now.
Ed, how hard are Republicans going to be pushing back on the stimulus plan?
I think they're going to push very hard. I think obviously they're not in a position to where they can control any part of this process. But I think that at this point in time, there's certain things that they believe very deeply in. Tax cuts is one of them. They want to make sure the public's money is not being wasted. And I think the biggest problem now is we're not sure. Obviously, there's a lot of smart people in the White House. The president's bought in there. But there's a lot of different plans. There's not one plan. And I think to a certain extent, people are worried about, do we spend all this money and it doesn't work?
John, I mean, that's what's so scary for so many people out there. No one really seems to know what to do, and no one seems to really have a grip on what has already been done, where the money that's been spent, where it went, and why.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point, Anderson, what people don't know. I mean, remember, it wasn't that long ago President Bush famously admitted he didn't know the price of a gallon of gasoline had gone up to nearly $4 a gallon. So the fact that Barack Obama is going to be briefed, obviously, as David pointed out, on a lot of the big issues, but sometimes the little bread and butter issues. Part of this is communicating to the folks. Again, things are probably going to get worse before they get better, but you want to know that the leader of the country understands that they're getting worse and exactly where they're getting worse.
David, let's talk about the banks, because, you know, while a lot of us were focusing on the inauguration, you suddenly look at the Bank of America stock, which was, I think it had a high this year of like 45 or so. It's now down to 5 and change. JP Morgan Chase, all these banks, which were supposedly the safe banks, suddenly seem to be almost in penny stock territory.
That's the worry, Anderson, and they do need more capital. And the question is, where do you get it? You know, the credit markets are really, it's very hard to raise that money now. With the stock down so much, it's very hard to go to investors and ask them to pour more money into equities or any kind of stock like that. And so the government becomes the case of last resort. Well, the government already has a lot of money into this, but if they have to go and nationalize it, and what that would mean is the government would completely run the banks, like Bank of America and Citi. That's a big, huge step. Other countries have done this, gotten in, and then sort of denationalized. But if you nationalize 2 banks, as one expert told me today, if you nationalize 2 of the main banks, how do the other banks compete against a government-owned bank, which is offering money at 1%? You know, how does JP Morgan Chase compete against that? It puts a lot of pressure on for the government then to nationalize a number of big banks, and that's very expensive. Has its own perils. So when Paul Volcker said yesterday, we may be looking at trillions of dollars in government spending, grants, loans, guarantees, there are a lot of people now waking up to say, you know, this could get a lot more expensive than we ever thought, and we don't know if it will work. That's the real fear.
Let's talk about Guantanamo briefly. Ed, Republican lawmakers pushing back on the notion of not just closing down Guantanamo, but bringing those detainees to be housed somewhere in the United States, saying essentially it's a national security issue.
Well, listen, there's plenty of places we can house 250 people. You know, there's lots of prisoners, there's lots of isolated places. I think that's a moot issue. This president promised he was going to do it. He did it. He got 9.5 million votes and John McCain, so he's entitled to do what he said he was going to do. I think it's a red herring. I think there's other issues that are far more significant than shutting that thing down.
John, when you hear people say it's a national security issue, do you buy that?
No, I don't. I think you've already got an individual like Ramses Youssef who's locked up in Florence, Colorado. Obviously, we're talking about more people here, but we've gone from 775 prisoners down to about 260 some in the last 8 years. I think more importantly, as Ed pointed out, Barack Obama is doing something. He's forcing everybody to deal with this issue. So in a year from now, we'll get rid of, hopefully, the rest of these individuals. Let's not pretend they're not bad actors. But already, as Bob Gates said today, you've got Europe that's willing to pitch in and try to repatriate or in some way deal with these individuals. And that's what we need now is international cooperation. And this move is helping to do that.
We're going to have more from John Ridley.
Yeah, Anderson?
David, yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
No,
I just want to
David.
add briefly. This connects actually to the economic issue. Barack Obama's been making the point there's a lack of confidence in the country. If he can, by following through on his campaign promises, create confidence in the government, maybe it can make people more confident about the economic future and help to get the economic wheels moving again.
And confidence is the key to a lot of this. David Gergen, Ed Rollins, John Ridley, we're going to have more from you throughout this hour. A reminder, David's also blogging for us. You can see his